Have you ever wondered why two simple words, spoken over 2,000 years ago, still hold the power to completely transform your reality today? What if I told you that everything you've been taught about prayer, about seeking God, about finding peace and abundance, has been pointing you in the wrong direction? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're the gateway to understanding the most profound spiritual secret that Jesus ever revealed. And it's hidden in plain sight within two words you use every single day without realizing their true power. When Jesus declared, "I am," he wasn't making a casual introduction or stating his name for the crowd. He was revealing the ultimate key to spiritual consciousness, a principle so powerful that it could heal the sick, transform water into wine, and transcend even death itself. Yet most of us rush past these words 100 times a day, completely unaware that we're either building our reality or destroying it with every utterance. Has this ever happened to you? You say, "I am tired, I am broke, I am sick," and somehow those conditions seem to become more real, more solid, more unchangeable in your life. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's what traditional religion never fully explained. The mystery of I am isn't in the words themselves, it's in the consciousness behind them. When Jesus spoke those words, he wasn't identifying with his physical body or his human personality. He wasn't talking about Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter's son. He was declaring something far more radical, something that threatened the entire religious establishment of his time. He was announcing that the presence of God was his only true identity, that the divine wasn't somewhere in the heavens looking down, but was the very eye looking through his eyes. This is where everything you've been taught begins to unravel. We've been conditioned to seek God outside ourselves, to pray to something distant and separate, to beg for blessings from a power that exists somewhere beyond the clouds. We bow, we plead, we make promises, all while believing that God is out there and we are in here, separated by an unbridgeable gulf. But what if that entire framework is backwards? What if the I am that Jesus revealed is pointing to a truth so simple yet so profound that it changes absolutely everything? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. The I am that you speak isn't just a grammatical necessity, it's the infinite presence expressing itself as your unique consciousness right now, in this very moment. When you begin to understand this, when you truly grasp why Jesus placed so much emphasis on these two words, your entire experience of reality begins to shift. Not because you're doing more, not because you're achieving some spiritual status, but because you're finally recognizing what has always been true about your deepest identity. So what happens when this recognition becomes more than just an interesting concept? What occurs in your life when the I am stops being something you think about and becomes something you live from? This is precisely where Edgar Casey comes into the picture, and his discoveries will challenge everything you thought you knew about spiritual power. Casey spent decades in deep exploration, not through academic study alone, but through direct spiritual insight, peeling back layers of misunderstanding that had accumulated over centuries of religious teaching. What he uncovered was revolutionary. When Jesus said, "I am," he wasn't making a statement about his human personality, his history as a carpenter's son, or even his circumstances. Walking the dusty roads of Galilee, he was pointing to something far more fundamental, the infinite presence expressing itself in that particular moment, in that particular form. Think about the implications of this for just a moment. Every time you speak those two words, you're either operating as a spiritual force or as a limited human identity trapped by conditions. When you say, I am with true spiritual awareness, you're not speaking as a person with problems, fears, or limitations. You're speaking as consciousness itself, that infinite, eternal presence that animates every living thing, that existed before your body was formed and will continue after it returns to dust. This consciousness cannot be confined by material circumstances, cannot be diminished by bank accounts or medical diagnoses, cannot be threatened by anything that happens in the physical world. But here's where most people unknowingly create their own suffering, and this is the hidden truth that changes the entire game. Every single time you attach I am to a temporary condition, you're performing an act of spiritual misdirection that has devastating consequences. When you declare, I am sick, you're not simply describing a bodily symptom. You're claiming that the infinite consciousness that is your true nature has somehow become diseased. When you say, I am broke, you're not just acknowledging a bank balance. You're identifying the limitless source of all abundance as lacking. When you whisper, I am afraid, you're taking the fearless divine presence and binding it to a temporary emotion. This misidentification is the root cause of all human suffering, not the circumstances themselves. It's not that you have a body experiencing illness. It's that you've confused your true identity with that body. It's not that you're facing financial challenges. It's that you've forgotten that the I of your being is infinite supply itself. The circumstances are real in their realm, yes, but they have nothing to do with what you truly are. The transformation begins the moment you stop giving your divine identity away to conditions that are temporary, changeable, and ultimately powerless over the real you. If these teachings resonate with you, go ahead and subscribe. I'm here bringing you the kind of spiritual wisdom that actually transforms your life, not just concepts that sound good. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because understanding it intellectually is just the beginning. There's a practical dimension to this that affects your health, your relationships, your financial reality, and every single decision you make throughout your day. The impact of truly grasping this principle extends far beyond spiritual philosophy. It becomes the foundation for a completely different way of experiencing life itself, where problems don't need to be fought, where abundance doesn't need to be chased, and where peace isn't dependent on external conditions aligning in your favor. If this is starting to click for you, if you're beginning to see how you've been using these two words to either empower or diminish your experience, write in the comments, I see it now. This is where Jesus' approach becomes absolutely crystal clear, and it's a pattern you can trace through every single recorded statement he made. Look at the evidence yourself. You will never find Jesus declaring, I am sick, or I am lacking, or I am unworthy. Instead, what do you find? I am the resurrection and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He was consistently, relentlessly identifying with the infinite rather than with temporary conditions. This wasn't positive affirmation or motivational self-talk. This was a man who understood his true nature so completely that he refused to give his identity away to anything less than eternal truth. And here's the revolutionary part. When you begin using I am only with what is permanent and true, your entire experience starts to mirror that consciousness, not because you're creating something new, but because you're finally aligning with what has always been real. Edgar Cayce's most profound discovery might surprise you because it goes against everything our achievement-obsessed culture teaches. He found that the I am isn't something you need to create, develop, earn, or achieve through years of practice and spiritual discipline. It already is. Right now, in this moment, the infinite presence is your actual identity. It's not a future destination or a goal to reach through meditation retreats and enlightenment experiences. The entire journey isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about stopping the identification with what you are not. It's a process of removal, not addition. You're peeling away the false layers, the borrowed identities, the conditioned beliefs that have obscured your true nature since childhood. This becomes incredibly practical when you're facing real-life challenges, especially something as visceral and immediate as physical illness. The automatic response, the one that feels natural and honest, is to say, "I am sick and I need healing." But watch what happens in that moment. The instant you claim, "I am sick," you've performed a spiritual impossibility. You've taken the I that you truly are, which is infinite spirit, limitless consciousness, divine presence, and you've confined it within a temporary bodily condition. The I that is your true being cannot be sick any more than the ocean can be dry or the sun can be dark. It's a contradiction of terms. Yes, the body may be showing symptoms, the physical form may be experiencing discomfort or disease, but that body is not the I am. That body is something you inhabit, something you experience through, but it's not the infinite consciousness that is your actual identity. The transformation in your life doesn't happen through fighting the symptoms or denying their appearance. It happens through this fundamental shift in identity. When you stop claiming conditions as your true self, when you withdraw your divine identity from temporary circumstances, something shifts at the level of causation. The body begins responding to the consciousness that is directing it, and that consciousness is either identifying as limited and diseased or as infinite and whole. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist or living in spiritual denial. It's about understanding the mechanics of consciousness and identity that operate beneath all physical manifestations. The same principle that Jesus demonstrated with physical healing applies to every single area of your life, and the impact of truly understanding this reaches far beyond what most spiritual teachings even dare to suggest. Your financial reality, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your daily decisions, all of these are being shaped by what you're claiming when you say, "I am." If you're beginning to recognize how powerful your identity statements have been in creating your current experience, write in the comments, "I'm ready to shift." Let's take this understanding and apply it across your entire life, because this principle doesn't discriminate. It works the same way whether you're dealing with money, relationships, health, or purpose. When you find yourself thinking, "I am poor and need supply," you're making the same fundamental mistake as claiming sickness as your identity. You're taking the infinite source of all abundance and confining it within a bank account balance. But what if you shifted that to, "I am the infinite abundance of God made visible"? Notice the difference. You're not trying to get abundance from somewhere outside yourself. You're recognizing that the I of your being is the source itself. The same transformation happens with love and connection. Instead of, "I am alone and need someone to complete me," you recognize, "I am the presence of love itself." This isn't about denying that you might desire partnership or that circumstances feel challenging. It's about identifying the eternal truth beneath all temporary conditions. Here's where the hidden mechanics of spiritual transformation become visible, and this is what separates Jesus' teaching from almost everything else you'll encounter. Most spiritual methodologies, and I mean the vast majority of what fills bookstores and YouTube channels, give you something to do. They tell you to visualize your desires, affirm positive statements, practice manifestation rituals, repeat mantras, create vision boards, or perform specific meditations. All of these are action-based approaches, and while they may produce some results, they're operating from a fundamental assumption that you lack something and need to acquire it through effort. But Jesus revealed something far more powerful than any technique or practice. He revealed a state of being. The I am isn't an action that requires effort, discipline, or years of spiritual gymnastics. It's a recognition of what already exists in this exact moment. This shift is subtle, but changes everything about your spiritual journey. You move from trying to get things from God to realizing that God is already the substance of your being, expressing as your experience. You stop reaching outward and start recognizing inward. The transformation isn't something you make happen, it's something you allow by removing the false beliefs that were blocking it. Edgar Casey was absolutely clear about this. Healing isn't about changing conditions through force of will, or even through prayer in the traditional sense. Healing is about changing your identity at the deepest level. When you truly know yourself as the I am, when this recognition becomes more real to you than any symptom or circumstance, the conditions themselves have no choice but to align with that truth. It's not that you heal the body through some external intervention. You recognize that the I that you truly are was never sick, never broken, never diminished by anything happening in the physical realm. This is where the real power lives, in this shift of identity that happens before any action, before any technique, before any external change. Your entire reality is being generated from the level of identity, from what you're claiming when you say those two simple words. The circumstances you're experiencing right now are the perfect mirror of the identity you've been living from, often unconsciously. When that identity shifts at the core, everything built upon it must shift as well. This isn't magical thinking or spiritual bypassing. This is understanding the architecture of consciousness itself and how it creates your lived experience moment by moment. If this resonates with you and you're starting to see the difference between doing and being, write in the comments, I am. When this understanding truly deepens inside you, something remarkable happens that most people never experience in their entire lifetime. You stop living from the level of effect, constantly reacting to circumstances, constantly being pushed and pulled by appearances. Instead, you begin resting in the I am. And from that resting place, that place of spiritual recognition rather than human effort, every need is met, every problem dissolves, every fear vanishes. Not through struggle, not through working harder or figuring it all out, but through the simple act of returning to your true identity. This is living from cause rather than effect, and it changes the entire game because you're no longer at the mercy of conditions. You're operating from the source level where conditions themselves are generated. Hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are searching for the same truth that brought you here today. Let me share a real story that demonstrates exactly how this works in practice. Because theory without application is just a philosophy. There was a woman named Margaret who suffered with chronic, debilitating pain for 7 solid years. Imagine living like that. 7 years where every morning you wake up and the pain is still there, where you've exhausted every medical option, where doctors have run every test imaginable and found absolutely nothing wrong. Every treatment failed, every therapy produced no results. She tried conventional medicine, alternative approaches, pain management specialists, physical therapy, and nothing touched it. By the time she came to Edgar Casey, she was desperate, exhausted, and honestly ready to give up any hope of relief. This was her last attempt at finding freedom from the unrelenting suffering that had consumed nearly a decade of her life. Now here's where this gets fascinating and reveals the true mechanics of what we've been discussing. Edgar Casey didn't do what Margaret expected. He didn't pray for her healing. He didn't perform some energetic treatment. He didn't give her supplements or recommend another specialist. Instead, he asked her one single penetrating question that would change everything. Who is the I that says, I am in pain? Margaret was confused at first, as most people would be. She responded with the obvious answer, I am. I'm the one suffering. But Casey pressed deeper, refusing to let her settle for surface-level answers. Is the I am you speak of capable of pain? Can infinite spirit hurt? Can God suffer? These questions might sound philosophical, but they were surgical strikes at the root of her condition. Casey wasn't addressing the pain itself, he was addressing the identity that was claiming ownership of the pain. He was forcing Margaret to examine something she'd never questioned before. What exactly was this I that she kept saying was in pain? Was it really her true self, or was it a false identity she'd been living from? Margaret sat there in silence for nearly 20 minutes, and you can imagine what was happening in that silence. Years of assumptions were being dismantled. A lifetime of identifying herself with her body and its sensations was being questioned at the deepest level. Then something shifted in her consciousness, something that no medication or therapy could have produced. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she'd been identifying her true self, the I am, with a physical body and its temporary sensations. The pain didn't belong to the I that she truly was. It belonged to a false sense of identity, a mistaken understanding of what she actually was, beneath all appearances. If you've ever experienced chronic pain or suffering that seemed to define your entire existence, write in the comments, "I understand this journey." What happened next in Margaret's experience reveals something that modern medicine struggles to explain, but that spiritual understanding makes perfectly clear. Within just 3 weeks, the pain that had dominated her life for 7 years began to diminish. Not through surgery, not through medication, not through any physical intervention whatsoever. Within 2 months, it was completely gone. But here's the critical detail that most people miss. She didn't fight the pain, didn't use willpower to overcome it, didn't engage in positive thinking battles with her symptoms. The transformation happened because she stopped claiming the pain as her identity. She withdrew her I am from the condition, and in that withdrawal, the truth of her being had space to emerge naturally. The body responded to the shift in consciousness, not to any external force applied to it. This isn't an isolated incident or some anomaly that proves nothing. The same principle works across every domain of human experience, and the impact extends far beyond physical healing. Consider the story of a businessman named Robert, whose entire financial world was collapsing around him. He was facing bankruptcy, drowning in debt, watching everything. He'd spent years building crumble piece by piece. Every morning became a nightmare. He'd wake up, and immediately the thoughts would flood in. I am failing, I am losing everything, I am going under. His prayers had become desperate pleas for God to intervene from outside, to send some miracle customer, to magically make the numbers work, to save his business through some external force that would rescue him from the consequences of his circumstances. Robert's mindset was entirely focused on what he lacked, what he was losing, what was being taken from him. Every decision he made came from a place of fear and scarcity because that's the identity he was living from. He'd go to sleep thinking about failure and wake up confirming it. His entire internal dialogue was a constant affirmation of lack, and the more he affirmed it, the more his experience seemed to validate it. The hidden truth that Robert hadn't yet discovered was that he wasn't actually dealing with a business problem or a money problem. He was dealing with an identity problem. The financial circumstances were simply the external reflection of the consciousness he was operating from. Then something significant happened that changed his entire trajectory. Robert heard Edgar Casey speak about the I am principle, and for the first time, he recognized the pattern he'd been living. He realized with startling clarity that he'd been claiming lack as his identity every single day. He'd been declaring, "I am broke," instead of recognizing that the I of his being is infinite supply itself, the source rather than the receiver. This recognition didn't immediately solve his business problems or make his debt disappear, but it initiated a fundamental shift in his consciousness that would eventually transform everything. He began a practice that seemed almost too simple to be effective, yet it contained the same power that had healed Margaret and that Jesus had demonstrated 2,000 years earlier. Every single morning, before he looked at financial statements, before he checked emails, before he allowed the circumstances to dictate his identity, Robert would sit quietly and practice recognition. Not affirmation, not positive thinking, but genuine recognition of truth. I am is the abundance of God. I am is infinite resource. I am is divine intelligence expressing. If you've ever felt trapped by financial circumstances that seem to define your entire reality, write in the comments, "Abundance is my true nature." This practice that Robert adopted wasn't what you'd find in typical business coaching or financial planning seminars. He wasn't creating spreadsheets or networking strategies during this morning time. He was doing something far more fundamental. He was resetting his identity at the source level before engaging with the world of effects. This wasn't positive thinking, where you're trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. This was recognition of spiritual truth, acknowledging what is eternally real regardless of temporary appearances. There's a massive difference between those two approaches, and understanding that difference is crucial to your own transformation journey. Now here's what happened, and this is where patience becomes part of the equation. Robert's business didn't turn around overnight. It took 4 months, not 4 days or even 4 weeks. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. Ideas would come to him in those morning sessions, creative solutions to problems that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Connections started appearing, people reaching out, seemingly by chance with opportunities or referrals. Doors that had been closed for years suddenly opened, not because he was knocking harder, but because his consciousness had changed in a way that made those opportunities visible and accessible. What had been there all along, but invisible to his previous state of consciousness, now became obvious and available. His business didn't just survive the crisis, it transformed into something completely different, something more aligned with his actual purpose and gifts, rather than what he thought he should be doing. The crucial revelation here is the sequence. The consciousness changed first, and only then did the circumstances follow. Not the other way around. Most people wait for circumstances to improve before they'll allow themselves to feel abundant or successful, but that's backwards. The outer world is always reflecting the inner state, always following consciousness, never leading it. Robert's financial situation was the last thing to change because it was the effect, not the cause. The cause was the daily practice of recognizing his true identity as infinite supply itself. This same transformative principle applies whether you're dealing with money, health, relationships, or any other challenge that seems to define your current reality. The mechanics are identical across every domain of life because they're operating at the level of consciousness, not at the level of specific circumstances. When you shift your identity from I am, attached to conditions, to I am, recognized as infinite presence, everything built upon that foundation must eventually reorganize itself. The timeline varies. Margaret's healing took 2 months, Robert's business transformation took 4, but the principle is consistent and reliable. What makes this approach so powerful is that you're not trying to manipulate circumstances or force outcomes through human effort alone. You're working at the causal level where circumstances are generated in the first place. You're addressing the hidden architecture behind your visible experience, and when that architecture shifts, the building constructed upon it has no choice but to shift as well. The impact of this understanding extends beyond solving individual problems. It fundamentally alters how you navigate reality itself, how you make decisions, how you respond to challenges, and ultimately what you believe is possible for your life. If you're starting to recognize the power of working at the level of identity rather than circumstances, write in the comments, "Consciousness creates reality." Let me share another story that takes this principle into even more challenging territory, because it's one thing to apply this understanding to your own life, and quite another to apply it to someone you love who's suffering. Edgar Casey worked with a mother whose son was deep in the grip of drug addiction. And this wasn't a recent development. She'd been watching him spiral for years. She'd prayed desperately, begged God with tears to change her son, to intervene and save him from himself. She'd tried every approach imaginable: intervention, therapy, tough love where she cut him off completely, enabling where she supported him, hoping it would help, and nothing made any difference. Her son kept disappearing for days or weeks at a time, kept breaking her heart over and over again. The emotional toll was devastating, and she came to Casey carrying not just worry, but guilt, shame, and a crushing sense of failure as a mother. What Casey told her must have sounded almost cruel at first, certainly shocking. He said, "Stop praying for your son to change. Stop seeing him as an addict. Stop identifying him with his condition." You can imagine how that landed. A mother watching her child destroy himself and being told to stop praying for his healing. But Casey wasn't finished. He continued with the revelation that would eventually save this young man's life. Instead, recognize the truth. Your son's real identity is, "I am the presence of God." That presence cannot be addicted because it is whole, free, and perfect right now, in this very moment, regardless of what his behavior appears to be showing you. This instruction cuts against every human instinct, every parental impulse to fix and save and rescue. But what Casey understood, what this mother would come to discover through her own journey, is that every time she saw her son as an addict, every time she prayed for God to change him, she was actually reinforcing the false identity. She was giving power to the addiction by treating it as his true nature, rather than as a temporary condition obscuring his true nature. Her love and concern were completely genuine, but her approach was strengthening the very thing she wanted to eliminate. So, she began a practice that required more discipline and faith than anything she'd ever attempted. For 6 months she held to this new understanding. Some days were harder than others. In fact, some days her son seemed worse, his behavior more erratic, his choices more destructive. The human temptation was to panic, to go back to the old patterns of trying to control and fix and manage his life. But she held firm to the truth of his being, rather than the appearance of his behavior. She stopped mothering the addiction and started recognizing the Christ consciousness within him, that perfect I am presence that existed beneath all the chaos and pain. This wasn't denial or pretending the problem didn't exist. She still maintained appropriate boundaries and didn't enable his destructive choices. But internally, in her consciousness, she refused to see him as anything less than the infinite presence expressing as her son. She stopped empowering the false identity and started holding space for the truth to emerge. The transformation that eventually occurred wasn't instantaneous, but it was profound and lasting in ways that all the previous interventions had never been. If you've ever loved someone trapped in a pattern they couldn't seem to break, write in the comments, "I see beyond appearances." What happened over the following months reveals something that seems impossible until you understand the mechanics operating beneath the surface. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift in her son. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. There was no lightning bolt moment where everything transformed overnight. But gradually, his consciousness began responding to the truth that his mother was holding for him. He entered treatment on his own initiative, not because she begged or manipulated or threatened, but because some internal recognition began stirring within him. And here's the remarkable part. He stayed. He completed the program. Today, years later, he's living free from addiction, not because his mother changed him through force or emotional pleading, but because she stopped empowering the false identity and consistently recognized only his true nature as the I am presence. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about these stories, because the tendency is to dismiss them as exceptions, as lucky coincidences, or as unexplainable miracles that happen to other people but couldn't possibly apply to your situation. But that's not what's happening here at all. These aren't exceptions to some rule. They're examples of spiritual law in action, as consistent and reliable as gravity. When you stop identifying with conditions and start identifying with the I am, when you recognize your true nature as infinite consciousness rather than limited personality, reality itself must conform to that recognition. This isn't wishful thinking or positive psychology. This is how consciousness actually works at the foundational level. What you claim as your identity, what you consistently recognize as true about yourself or others, becomes your lived experience. The circumstances are always following consciousness, always reflecting back what you're holding as real and true. Edgar Cayce identified the single greatest barrier to experiencing this transformation, and he called it personal sense. This is the deeply ingrained belief that you are a separate person, an isolated individual with personal problems that require personal solutions. You wake up thinking, I have this problem, or I need that solution, or my situation is uniquely difficult. You're constantly operating from the perspective of being a separate self, navigating a world of other separate selves, all competing for limited resources, all trying to solve individual problems through individual effort. But here's what Casey understood that most people never grasp. The I am has no personal problems whatsoever. The infinite consciousness that is your true nature doesn't have financial struggles or relationship drama or health crises. It is infinite, perfect, whole, and complete in every moment. The problems you're experiencing aren't happening to the I am. They're happening within the dream of personal sense, within the illusion of separation. When you rest in the recognition of what you truly are, even for brief moments throughout your day, the personal sense with all its troubles and limitations begins to dissolve naturally. You're not fighting the problems or trying to overcome them through effort. You're simply withdrawing your identification from the false sense of self that was claiming ownership of those problems in the first place. The shift happens at the level of identity, and everything else follows from that fundamental change in consciousness. If you're beginning to see how personal sense has been the hidden architect of your struggles, write in the comments, I release personal sense. So how do you actually integrate this understanding into your daily life when you're not sitting in meditation or contemplation? Here's the essential practice that Edgar Cayce taught his students, and it's so simple that most people dismiss it as too basic to be powerful. Throughout your day, whenever fear surfaces, whenever lack appears in your mind, whenever pain makes itself known, you pause. In that pause, you ask yourself one penetrating question. Who is experiencing this? Is it the I am, or is it the false sense of personal self? Then, without fighting the condition or trying to make it go away through effort, you gently return to the truth. I am is the presence of God. I am is whole. I am is supplied. You're not battling the circumstances, you're simply withdrawing your identification from them, refusing to claim them as your true nature. Edgar Cayce gave this practice a specific name that captures its essence perfectly. He called it practicing the presence. Notice what this isn't. It's not thinking about God as if God were an object of thought, and it's not praying to God as if God were somewhere distant listening to your requests. Instead, it's recognizing that the I of your being is God expressing right here, right now, in this exact moment. This recognition isn't something you do occasionally when you remember or when things get difficult. It becomes your natural state of being, the foundational awareness from which you live every moment. The transformation happens when this shifts from being a technique you practice to being the reality you inhabit. Start integrating this with the smallest, most ordinary moments of your day, because that's where the real transformation takes root. When you wake up in the morning, before your mind floods with all the problems waiting for you, before the to-do list kicks in, before you reach for your phone, pause and recognize, I am awake. Not I, John or Sarah or whoever, am waking up to face another difficult day. Simply, I am. Infinite consciousness expressing as this experience of awakening. When you eat breakfast, don't just mindlessly consume food while scrolling through news. Recognize, I am sustained by infinite substance. When you're walking to your car or sitting at your desk, recognize, I am is the intelligence accomplishing this task. This is recognition, not affirmation, and understanding that difference changes everything. Affirmations are trying to create something you don't have or convince yourself of something you don't believe. They come from lack, from the sense that you need to make something true through repetition. But recognition is acknowledging what already is true, what has always been true, what will always be true regardless of circumstances. Recognition comes from wholeness, from the understanding that you're not trying to become something, you're simply removing the false beliefs that obscure what you already are. One approach exhausts you with effort, the other allows you to rest in truth. The impact of this seemingly simple practice extends far beyond what logic would suggest. You're reprogramming your consciousness at the most fundamental level, retraining yourself to identify as infinite presence rather than limited personality. Each moment of recognition is a deposit into your spiritual consciousness, and over time, these deposits compound. The journey isn't about reaching some distant goal. It's about returning again and again to the truth of what you are, until that truth becomes more real to you than any condition. If you're ready to begin practicing the presence in your daily life, write in the comments, I practice presence now. Now let me share a specific technique that Edgar Casey taught for those moments when everything feels like it's falling apart, when fear has you in its grip and circumstances seem absolutely impossible. He called it the pause, and it's one of the most practical tools you'll ever learn for navigating crisis. When terror strikes, when panic rises, when your mind is racing toward catastrophe, you pause everything. You don't react immediately. You don't frantically try to solve the problem. You don't let the panic drive your decisions. Instead, you create a space, even if it's just 30 seconds, where you return to the I am. This pause interrupts the false identity that's claiming the crisis as reality and opens up room for truth to enter your consciousness. Let me give you a real example of how powerful this simple technique can be. A woman received devastating news from her doctor. They'd found a mass and scheduled immediate surgery. The kind of news that sends your entire world into freefall, where terror doesn't just visit, it moves in and takes over every thought. She could barely breathe, couldn't sleep, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios on an endless loop. But she remembered the pause. Every single time fear arose and tried to consume her, she stopped. She didn't deny the medical situation or pretend she wasn't afraid. She simply paused and returned to the truth beneath the fear. I am is perfect life. I am cannot be threatened by anything in the material world. Day after day, she practiced this. Some moments were easier than others, but she kept returning to that recognition, kept withdrawing her identity from the condition and resting in what was eternally true. By the time her pre-surgery scan arrived, the one that would finalize the surgical plan, something inexplicable had occurred. The mass had vanished completely. The doctors had no explanation, called it spontaneous remission or a misdiagnosis, but she knew what had happened. The consciousness that had been identifying with disease had shifted to recognizing perfect life, and the body responded to that shift at the cellular level. Beyond the pause, Edgar Casey taught something equally transformative about releasing judgment. And this practice impacts not just your own healing, but every relationship in your life. Every time you judge yourself, "I'm so stupid, I always fail, I'm not good enough," you're operating from personal sense rather than "I am" consciousness. You're treating yourself as a limited person with permanent flaws instead of recognizing the infinite presence expressing through temporary human experience. And every time you judge others, they're selfish, they're broken, they'll never change, you're doing the same thing to them, empowering the false identity instead of recognizing their true nature. The I am doesn't judge because it recognizes only itself in all beings. It sees past the appearance of behavior, past the temporary conditions and circumstances, straight to the truth that exists beneath everything. This doesn't mean you ignore harmful behavior or pretend wrong actions don't have consequences. It means you see the behavior without confusing it with identity. You maintain boundaries and make wise decisions while still recognizing that every person's true nature is the same, infinite. Consciousness expressing uniquely. When you begin living from this perspective, something extraordinary happens in your relationships and in your own self-perception. If you're ready to release judgment and see with spiritual vision, write in the comments, "I see the truth in all." Let me address something that causes tremendous anxiety for most people, and that's the whole question of supply, money, resources, income, financial security. You've been conditioned your entire life to believe that supply comes from external sources. Your job provides it, your clients generate it, your investments produce it, or perhaps wealthy relatives give it to you. This creates constant fear because what happens if the job ends? What if the clients leave? What if the market crashes? You're always vulnerable, always dependent, always at the mercy of conditions outside your control. But when you truly understand that I am is infinite supply itself, everything shifts at the foundation. The source is never outside you. Your employer isn't your source. I am is your source. Your business isn't your source. I am is your source. And that source is infinite, inexhaustible, never-ending, regardless of what's happening in the economy or your industry. This understanding liberates you from the constant anxiety that drives so many decisions. The channels through which supply flows may change constantly. One job might end while another begins. One income stream might dry up completely, while three unexpected streams open. A client might leave while referrals start pouring in from somewhere you never anticipated. But the source itself, the I am that you truly are, never diminishes, never fails, never runs out. When you live from this knowing, when you recognize in every financial transaction that I am is infinite supply, making itself visible, you're no longer operating from scarcity. You're not clutching and grasping and manipulating to try to secure what you need. You're allowing the infinite to flow through whatever channels are appropriate in each moment. Now let's be completely honest about the challenges you'll face on this journey, because understanding the principle intellectually and living it consistently through difficult times are two very different things. The first major challenge hits when you've been practicing this recognition. You've been identifying as I am. You've been withdrawing from personal sense, and absolutely nothing seems to change in your circumstances. The illness continues. The bank account stays empty. The relationship remains broken. The problem you've been working on spiritually shows no signs of improvement whatsoever. Your mind starts screaming at you, "This doesn't work. You're fooling yourself. You need to stop this spiritual nonsense and take real action. Do something practical. Fix it the normal way through human effort and struggle." Edgar Casey addressed this challenge directly, and his answer is crucial to understand. If you're going to persist through the difficult periods. Spiritual realization always works in consciousness first, never in conditions immediately. Sometimes the inner shift happens rapidly and the outer change follows within days or weeks. But sometimes the inner work requires months of consistent practice before you see any evidence whatsoever in the physical realm. Your job isn't to make things happen or to produce results according to your timeline. Your job is to know the truth and remain faithful to that truth, regardless of what appearances are showing you. This requires a level of faith and persistence that goes beyond what most people are willing to give. The consciousness work is like planting seeds beneath the ground. For weeks you see nothing above the surface, and the temptation is to dig up the seeds to check if anything's happening. But beneath the visible level, roots are growing deep. The foundation is being established, and when the shoot finally breaks through the soil, it comes with a strength that can sustain lasting transformation rather than temporary change that collapses at the first challenge. If you're in that challenging period where nothing seems to be changing yet, write in the comments, "I trust the process." Here's what you need to understand about measuring your progress on this path. Stop looking at outer conditions as your metric and start paying attention to your inner peace. If you're experiencing peace in the midst of challenge, if you're remaining steady when circumstances would normally shake you to your core, that's proof that your consciousness is shifting at the foundational level. The outer world will catch up. It has no choice because it's always following consciousness, never leading it. Sometimes the inner shift produces immediate outer change, and you'll see results within days. But sometimes the consciousness work requires weeks or even months of consistent practice before physical evidence appears. Both timelines are valid, both are working perfectly, and trying to force faster results actually slows the process by introducing strain and doubt into your practice. Let's talk about how this transforms your relationships, because this is where most people experience some of their deepest pain and confusion. The majority of relationship problems stem from seeking completion in another person. You feel incomplete, so you look for someone to fill the emptiness. You feel unloved, so you need someone to love you and prove your worth. You feel alone, so you desperately search for connection. But this places impossible demands on human relationships and guarantees disappointment because no person can be your source of wholeness. When you recognize that I am is infinite love, when you know this as living truth rather than nice philosophy, everything about relationships transforms. You're no longer seeking love from others. You're expressing the love that you are. You're not trying to get completion from someone. You're sharing wholeness with another whole person. Relationships stop being transactions where two incomplete people trade neediness and start being celebrations where two whole beings choose to share the journey. Now, when it comes to health and your physical body, this is where clarity about identity becomes absolutely essential. Your body is not your identity. The I am that you truly are is pure spirit, perfect life, incapable of disease or decay. This doesn't mean you deny symptoms when they appear or refuse medical care when it's needed. It means you don't confuse the condition with your identity. You have a body that's showing symptoms. That's accurate. But you are not those symptoms. The I that is your deepest being, your actual consciousness, is eternally whole, perfect, and untouched by anything happening in the physical form. When you maintain this clarity, when you work with doctors and treatments while never claiming the disease as your identity, healing has space to occur naturally. The ultimate integration of everything we've discussed happens when living as I am stops being something you do during meditation, or when problems arise and becomes your constant state of being. You wake up as I am. You walk through your day as I am. You work as I am. You love as I am. You rest as I am. Every single experience becomes the infinite expressing itself in finite form, the eternal dancing as the temporary. You're no longer a person trying to be spiritual, struggling to achieve enlightenment, working towards some distant goal. Your spirit appearing as person, consciousness expressing as individuality, the wave that has finally remembered it's the ocean while still maintaining its unique form and movement. This recognition doesn't make you perfect in behavior or immune to human emotions and challenges. You'll still experience the full range of being human, but beneath it all, there's an unshakable knowing of what you truly are, and that knowing changes how you navigate absolutely everything. If this understanding is becoming your living reality, not just a concept you're learning, write in the comments, "I am living this truth." So here we are, at the end of this journey, through one of the most profound spiritual truths ever revealed. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with me through these insights about the I am and what it really means for your life, then something inside you already knows. This message was meant for you. This isn't random information you stumbled upon. This is recognition, calling to recognition, consciousness speaking to consciousness. If this content resonates with you, if these teachings about Edgar Casey and the power of true identity are exactly what you've been searching for, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'm here consistently bringing you this kind of deep spiritual wisdom, the kind that actually transforms your life, rather than just filling your head with concepts. These aren't just videos, they're invitations to remember who you truly are, and there's so much more we're going to explore together. And if you made it all the way to the end, let me know by writing in the comments, "I am the infinite presence." When I see that, I'll know you're not just watching passionately. You're actively engaging with this truth, making it your own, letting it work in your consciousness. Hit that like button too, because it helps this message reach others who are ready for it, people who are searching for the same truth that brought you here today. Your engagement genuinely matters in getting this content to those who need it most. Now, there's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper into practical application. It's the perfect continuation of what we've discussed today. Click and continue with me over there. I'll be waiting for you.